Like it or not, there is a very real possibility that you have not seen the last of Jayden Daniels on the football field this season. That and more on this mailbag episode of Locked On Commanders right now.
You are Locked On Commanders, your daily podcast on the Washington Commanders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, and now the #1 sports podcast network in the world. I'm David Harrison, your guy covering the Washington Commanders on ground for WUSA 9. Also writing about the Commanders on SI, and you can find me on X at dharrison82. Coming up on today's episode, we have got a mailbag episode. The insiders came through with some great questions, so we're going to talk about all kinds of stuff, including starting it all off with whether or not we should expect Jayden Daniels back on the football field in 2025, and all that is coming up on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and it's brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers, you can bet just $5, and if that bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. Again, that's your first $5 bet as a new member or user of FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Mailbag episode here. Insiders came through. We're here in Madrid, Spain. Timings are all just a little bit off, so this is a little bit of a later drop than I tend to like on Wednesday. So we are doing this live so that it gets out just as quickly as possible to all of you. Of course, I want to thank you for coming through. Whether you're live with us on YouTube at this moment, or you're later on YouTube, or you're later on audio, it doesn't matter. I thank you all coming through the same. We're going to kick this thing off with Jayden Daniels, quarterback, franchise quarterback, most important player on the field. So obviously, most important player in the organization. Insider Fran wanted to know, since the playoffs are a long shot, should the Commanders shelve, quote unquote, Jayden Daniels for the rest of the year? And I know that Fran is not the only person to have this question, so I'm gonna give you the answer in a couple of ways. First, I'm gonna understand why any fan, not just Fran, right, but any fan or even any media member would take this stance and would argue that the Commanders should shut Jayden Daniels down. The Washington Commanders are not mathematically eliminated from the playoffs, but if we're being real, the last time a 3-7 team made the postseason, I don't even know how long ago it was. I just know it doesn't happen very often. If it happened more than 5 times in the last, 25 years, I would be incredibly surprised to find that out. So like Fran said, the odds are very long. It's not likely, basically just not going to happen, right? So why put your franchise quarterback out there who's already suffered 3 injuries this season alone that's made him miss games and brought up memories of past quarterbacks that could have been the franchise quarterback and weren't, and all that kind of stuff. So I totally get where the fans are coming from. However, my answer is, or my answer to should the Commanders shelve him, in an aspect when you're looking from the outside in, absolutely. But when you're looking from the inside out, no, they should absolutely not, because this program is built on competitiveness. This program is built on we never quit, we never stop. There's never a moment where we're not trying to be out there and be competitive, and that's the kind of player that the Washington Commanders want. The Washington Commanders don't want players that are going to accept rolling over and just saying, okay, we're done for the year. Like, just call it a year. Let's get our vacation time in, all that kind of stuff. That's not the kind of player the Washington Commanders want. It's not the kind of coaches the Washington Commanders want, is coaches who are willing to do that either. And that is where the outside influence of, well, okay, but that's a stupid, approach to do it. And you want to be competitive to 2026. It's more important than 2025. I got all of it. I'm just telling you the vibe inside the building. Now, again, every single week, there's new information. Every single week, things could change. And I would say this, and I have on good authority that there is a franchise legend who's pretty popular among fans. I'll have a story on that coming out at some point Thursday on WSA9.com, who basically echoes the same sentiment, that the only way Jayden Daniels should go out there, and this to me is partially because of the playoff odds of being so long, is if he is 100% completely healthy. So we're not talking about cleared to play. We're not talking about he's able to gut it out. We're not talking about like he could go out there and do it as long as he's safe. No, like 100% completely healthy. Everything is fine. Go ahead and get him out there, put his reps in, get that experience, because every possible piece of experience Jayden Daniels can get is going to help him in 2026. And as we've discussed on the show, this is not a perfect quarterback, right? This is still a young player who needs to develop. So get out there and do some good things with him while you can. Look, I understand the concern with injuries, but the reality of it is. And honestly, the Dallas Cowboys are actually a prime example. Before the Commanders-Cowboys game, you might remember cornerback Trevon Diggs had to go into concussion protocol. Why? Because he had an accident at his house. I don't know what the accident was, but he had an accident in his home. As simple as that. Took him out for that game, put him in concussion protocol. It's over. These things can happen in any environment. These injuries can come in any environment. You could shelve Jayden Daniels for the entire rest of the year, and in the very first preseason game, he can go out there and tear his ACL and he's lost for the year. There's no way to definitively say he's never going to get injured unless you just don't play him ever. You have to play him at some point in time. I understand people will probably say, okay, well, let's run the risk at the beginning of the season, but really, you're just kind of splitting hairs on when you think the risk is worth putting in. But the bottom line is development only comes from getting on the field. So it's not really a full-blown answer. I can't tell you what the Dan Quinn plan is because Dan Quinn never puts a plan out there further ahead than where the player is at right now. So right now, Jayden Daniels is at home. He's doing rehab, and that's going to be the plan. And once his rehab is done, then they'll reassess when the time comes. If this team is still on a losing streak by then my tone will probably change and be more in line with I think most fans are already at. But still, the team could very well go ahead and put him out there anyway to compete at the end of the season. Second question here. Insider Dr. Wonderful came through, said, we want to know, we already know, that Dan Quinn can call a defense, right? He did it great, amazingly for the Dallas Cowboys for a few years before getting another crack at being a head coach. But what are the reasonable expectations for this unit, given it's full of backups and practice squad players? I think that's really good context on expectations. And I think the good news is I haven't seen a lot of Commanders fans kind of going overboard with, okay, like now this defense is going to be dominant. Now this defense is going to get 6 sacks a game, 3 takeaways a game, nothing like that. So kudos to fans for not, kind of going overboard with the expectations, because I think that the reality of it is this is still a very banged up defense. It's still a defense that, it's not completely on coaching. It's not completely on scheme. Certainly part of it absolutely is on coaching and scheme, but certainly part of it is on the players and the execution as well. And I think as much as this is not about changing the scheme, it's about changing the deliverer of the message. I can't tell you right now. I can't put my finger on who or why the message wasn't getting through with Joe Witt Jr. Perhaps that story will come out at a later time. But I can just tell you, like, that's basically the gist of it, is hoping that, maybe DQ's experience and hands-on, right? I mean, Joe Witt, this was his second year as a defense coordinator ever. Dan Quinn has more years than that, just, in his little finger, right? So I think that could be important. What I would like to expect is that the Commanders defenders on the field, practice squad, young guys, no matter what, veterans, they're in the right place. They're in the right position, because that's really been the source of frustration for this defense this year. It's not just that they're getting beat. It's not just that they're giving up points. It's that they're not even in position. You're not even there to fight. Like you can't win a fight if you're not in the octagon. And it's like the Washington Commanders defense was going to the fight to get in the octagon and got lost in the dressing room, right? Like it's just been so far off. So I'd like to see them at least in the right place. Look, if the Dolphins offensive players, make more plays and just make better plays and still win the game, you can live with that a little bit more than you can just wide open receivers, just running free with nobody around them. Insider Michael, a similar DQ type question. What does this defense need to show for the rest of the year to get DQ off the hot seat? And does a good performance by DQ mean Joe Witt Jr. is out? So I said this on a recent episode. I think that Joe Witt Jr. losing his, essentially losing his role, even if he hasn't lost his title, is pretty much as close to being fired as you can get without being fired. There's really not a lot of coming back from that. It's kind of hard to take him out of that position and then try to reinstall him in that position. Players, you're shaking the foundation of his status with the players, with the assistant coaches, all that kind of stuff. And we've discussed this before. We'd like to believe that everybody in the building is just holding hands, singing kumbaya, roasting marshmallows, and they love each other. But the truth of the matter is, you got 70 players and a coaching staff. You're talking about 100 to 150 people between the entire staff, if not more, honestly. Not everybody's going to like each other, right? So, like, what are the odds that there's a defender who doesn't like Joe Witt Jr.? Solid. Like they're human beings, right? Like, what's the odds that a defensive assistant coach doesn't like Joe Witt Jr.? Solid, because they're human beings. And, there's nothing that the team or the coaches would ever say. And I'm not trying to be, like, inflammatory here. It's just human nature, right? Like, you put any staff of 20 people together, someone's not going to like someone. Now, can you work together? Yeah, absolutely. You can be professional. That's the key. But if you already don't like someone and then they lose this professional standing with you, that makes it just a little bit harder. So I think that the answer is kind of already set, a little bit, at least in my opinion. We'll see. DQ, he loves Joe Witt Jr., so if he can find a way to maybe give him another chance, potentially it happens. But just given history and just kind of given my own gut instinct, I think that's pretty much where we're at. As far as DQ being on the hot seat, I don't think Dan Quinn is on the hot seat. This is a head coach who was brought in here to reinstall the culture or instill a brand new culture into the team. He's done that. The culture is still there. I don't think he's on the hot seat. I don't think he's at risk of being fired. And again, every single week, information could change. You know what I mean? So that's where I stand on it on November 12th. I don't imagine that'll change for me. Doesn't mean I couldn't be wrong, and maybe there'd be a surprise in the offseason, right? But that's just where I stand, and I feel like I'm going to stand there for the rest of the season as well. Insider Thomas came through. Why did the team wait so long, 2 or 3 weeks, to make this move if things were this bad? And I think the only answer I can give you, which is not an answer that everybody's going to love, is you want to, if you're Dan Quinn, you want to give Joe Witt Jr. the opportunity to fix things, right? And yeah, it's like, okay, but that's why I'm asking you. Like, it didn't work in week 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Well, it worked that 1 week in Los Angeles. Why would you think it's going to get better? And I think that part of the conflict, and this isn't Dan Quinn, this is just me ideating as a trainer, is when you have these significant injuries, like your defense kind of changes, right? So it's like, okay, now what does our defense look like without Dorrance Armstrong? All right, didn't look great, Joe. So let's go ahead and try to fix it. Now we're on week 2. Like that might come in week 6, but we're in week 2 of this version of the defense, if that makes sense. You want to give them the opportunity to try to fix it themselves. And then you start instilling some changes on your own, whittling down the defense. Now you're going to move to the sideline. You know what I mean? And those were signs, and that's kind of what we talked about on the show, is those were signs that this was coming to a head. Ultimately, none of it worked. So this is basically the last-ditch effort for Dan Quinn to try to fix the defense moving forward. So good questions to start the mailbag. We got more coming up, including some of the injuries, some stuff on the injuries, and even some players that you're going to see this Sunday who might become new Commanders in 2026. All that next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode of Locked On Commanders is brought to you in part by Betterhelp. This show is sponsored by Betterhelp. As the days get shorter and the nights come earlier, it can start to feel a little heavier, especially when life is already packed with work, family, and everything else. This season is so important to reach out and check in with friends, family, or even yourself. Just like checking in on a teammate or reconnecting with someone you haven't seen in a while can lift your spirits, reaching out for therapy can make a real difference too. BetterHelp makes that first step easier by connecting you with a licensed therapist online from wherever you happen to be. I've noticed that simply talking things through sometimes, even for just a few minutes, can help clear my head, get me back on track. And therapy isn't just for when things are falling apart. It's about staying balanced and growing through the tough seasons. This month, don't wait to reach out. Whether you're checking in on a friend or reaching out to a therapist yourself, BetterHelp makes it simple to take that first step. Listeners get 10% off their first month at betterhelp.com/lockedon. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Because taking that step towards support might just leave you wondering, why didn't I do this sooner? Continue with today's mailbag episode of Locked On Commanders. Thanks to everybody for helping make this the #1 sports podcast network in the world. And a special thank you goes out to all of the everydayers. Those of you who come through for every single episode. And a special thank you for coming through for yet another episode of Locked On Commanders here, helping again to make this network the best sports podcast network ever. Greatly appreciate all of you for all of your support on this show and any other shows that you may happen to watch on the Locked On Podcast Network. Let's get into some off-season philosophy. So we've already been having conversations intermittently here about Adam Peters. And specifically, what did he do wrong? What did he do right? Et cetera, et cetera. And I think that it's important when we do this to make sure that we're honest about not getting sucked into revisionist history. Because when we get into revisionist history, it's easy to nitpick things because now you have all the answers, right? We know what's coming. We know what's going to happen. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't learn lessons from this stuff. It's just important to differentiate judgment using hindsight and learning lessons by using history, right? There's just a little bit of difference there. Insider Bill came through and said the injuries highlighted a massive drop-off from starters to the quote-unquote next man up. How should this affect Adam Peters' offseason strategy? Where do they need to prioritize signing starters versus signing high-quality competitive depth? So you always want to have, and I can't speak for Adam Peters, right? But just having been around the game, talked to enough executives, including Adam, but including other GMs and assistant GMs and coaches and other executives and things like that, you always want to field what you feel is a competitive roster. And so you want to look through the roster and say, okay, where do we feel like our weak points are? And maybe our weak point is left guard. Maybe a weak point is starting running back. Maybe a weak point is our third wide receiver, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, okay, let's look at the guys we have. Do we have anybody that, like, once we get a contract done, boom, we feel like you're that guy? If not, what's the free agent pool look like? If not, what does the trade market look like? If not, what does the draft market look like? And that sounds very simplistic, like, well, I'm just sitting here kind of rattling off the list, but really it's a year-round process. And that's why, like, whenever Dan Quinn's asked about, like, oh, did you consider trading here? Did you consider doing this? He always says, like, Adam Peters and his staff are working 24/7, round the clock. That's a process that never really stops. Like, even right now, with the trade deadline over, like, the trades, possible players that will be available for trade in the offseason even don't necessarily ever come off the table or out of the mind completely, right? It might go on to like a simmer, like put it on a burner that's set to simmer instead of boil, but it doesn't ever just come off the stove, if that makes sense. So how should the next man up thing work for or influence Adam Peters? I'll tell you this. Every NFL roster has a depth deficiency somewhere. Every single one. There is not a single roster in the National Football League that if they lose their starting 11, the guys coming up behind them are just as good or minimally worse. Like, there is a position, there is a group that if this team gets hurt in that position or that group, they are essentially screwed in that position or that group, because it's basically impossible. This job is really stinking hard. It's basically impossible to staff a team of essentially two sets of starters. Like, it just doesn't happen. You can't afford it. It's not going to work that way. The hope, all right, and you can't even really call it skill. The question every year is our deficiency and our depth deficiency spot going to get hampered by injuries? And a lot of times what you'll see is teams will go out and they'll kind of overcompensate, right? So, like, this year, obviously the wide receiver room, like the entire roster, right? But the wide receiver room and the defensive ends, I think, are part of the two position groups you could say were most hampered by injury throughout the largest span of the season. So, like, if Adam Peters goes out and, keeps Dorrance Armstrong still under contract, Dietrich Wise comes back, maybe you re-sign Jacob Martin, do a 1-year deal, and then you go out there and you spend a draft pick on a defensive end, and you go sign another, free agent coming off of a contract. Like, don't be surprised to see, like, Adam Peters, like, go overboard on DNs, go overboard on wide receivers, things like that. I'm not predicting it's going to happen. It's just that's kind of how history kind of tends to go with it, because they're like, okay, well, let's kind of shore up that situation. But the bottom line is every roster is going to have its holes. Every roster is going to have its depth deficiencies. The key is to getting the best guys you can in place when you can and where you can. But just like Olamide Zaccheaus, we talked about this, right? Olamide Zaccheaus, it's not like the Commanders are just like, no thanks, OZ, you go away. OZ wanted to go somewhere where he wasn't going to be battling for a fourth or fifth wide receiver spot like he was going to in Washington. So a guy who could theoretically be at least a solid number 3 at this stage in his career with this current roster, instead he's playing number 3 for the Chicago Bears because he felt like the opportunity was better elsewhere. Those guys are going to have opportunities in other places. So where do they need to prioritize signing starters versus signing high quality competitive depth? Basically, if you don't have a starting caliber player in this starting slot, like at the end of the year, they take their depth chart, they erase everybody with an expiring contract. Even if they plan on re-signing, they erase everybody with an expiring contract and restack your depth chart. Who is starting with the guys that we have under contract for 2026? I can't tell you who those guys are at this moment, but then you take that and you say, ooh, that's a problem. That's a problem. That's a problem. And you go from there. And you work on that. So believe me, we will dive very, very deeply into those position groups once we get to the offseason, which is not quite yet. I know you guys are moving that direction already. We will officially get there at some point. Insider Robbie came through and asked, with the Dolphins, the team that you're going to watch this weekend play the Commanders, are there any players that the Washington Commanders could be watching and that Commanders fan could watch as well that could be free agents that the Washington Commanders could target in 2026? I got 3 of them. One of them is not going to make this team was old, and that was the problem from the beginning. Crowd very happy. Matthew Judon, linebacker. He's on a 1-year deal. It's going to expire. High-impact veteran pass rusher at a premium position. Certainly someone they could consider. I'm not going to sit here and tell you they should sign any of these 3 players because we're not there yet, and I haven't done enough research on what they've been doing lately. These are just names that kind of stuck out. Rasul Douglas, also an older one. Cornerback, also on a 1-year deal. Crucial veteran help in the secondary as well as you try to get younger up top, keep those veterans in to play spot, and play for injuries and all that stuff. Running back Alexander Madison is the youngest guy on my 3-man list. He's also signed on a 1-year deal, would still be in his prime, from like an age standpoint, and offers experience to stabilize the backfield. Depending on what the future of Jeremy McNichols is, Chris Rodriguez is on an expiring contract as well. Alexander Madison could be a guy they bring in to kind of help fill a role. And then finally, on roster retention, insider Cam came through and asked about Marcus Mariota. Says, if he continues to look this good for the rest of the season, how concerned should we be that he's going to get a better offer elsewhere? I wouldn't be too concerned about that. Just in general, it's going to take quite an offer. Marcus kind of already went through that song and dance, unless he's kind of like fallen out of love with this coaching staff in this locker room, which I don't think he has. Marcus isn't going to get like a legitimate starting role somewhere, right now. That's just not where he is in his career. So being a backup to another young quarterback other than Jayden Daniels, I don't think really suits him all that well. So it would have to be quite an offer to draw him away from Washington. But it's a good problem to have. If we enter the offseason having to wonder, is Marcus Mariota going to leave because of how well he did, then that means he played really well. And actually, as I say, that's a good problem to have. I realize that some of you out there would actually hate that problem because some of you are already in tank for draft picks position, which is not a thing in the NFL. All 11 players on the field are going to be playing to win at any given time. We're going to wrap up today's mailbag episode talking about accountability for injuries and talking about a video that surfaced defending one currently suspended member of the Washington Commanders. Coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode of Locked On Commanders brought to you in part by Supply House. When the opening whistle blows on a new repair, get your crew moving forward with Supply House. Order today and see parts on your doorstep tomorrow. Over 280,000 plumbing, HVAC, and electrical items from the most trusted brands in the business. Their real-time inventory and honest lead times keep you away from punting projects, while their industry-leading customer service always has your blind side covered. If you need parts fast for a project, Supply House has next-day delivery. Talk about a game changer. The Part Finder tool is a 3D schematics can save you hours on the job where every detail matters. So join the free Trademaster program today and score serious perks like priority shipping, lower prices, and a dedicated support line. Visit supplyhouse.com to sign up for free. Use the promo code SHNFL5 for 5% off your first order. That's supplyhouse.com. Real people, real service. Today's episode of Locked On Commanders is also brought to you in part by FanDuel. The NFL season is rolling ahead. The NBA is back, and there's no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Even if you missed tip-off, you missed the start of an NBA game, or you're watching the game and you're like, man, this dude is on fire. He can't be stopped. You want to ride that hot hand. FanDuel has live bets on everything from who's going to score next to fourth quarter comebacks and pretty much everything in between. Plus, you can combine your bets into same game parlays, even on live bets, and you can go shot for shot, all kinds of different things, and go for a chance at a bigger payout every day. As you already know, I love my same game parlays. I have at least one every weekend. It helps keep the games just a little bit more exciting, especially when your team is making that late push, or if you're watching a game that doesn't feature your favorite team, like you might be this weekend after the Commanders play 9:30 a.m. Eastern time. Right now, FanDuel is giving new customers $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. So head to FanDuel.com to sign up and play your game with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. Wrapping up today's mailbag episode of Locked On Commanders, talking about accountability for injuries and a little bit of an update to the Daron Payne suspension saga. So Insider Michael came through. Can or will any of the coaches or training staff be held accountable for the massive wave of injuries the team has suffered this season? As far as coaches being held accountable for the injuries, not really, unless they're violating like CBA practicing limits as far as like practice time and intensity and all that stuff, which I have no inclination or no indication that that's happening. So no, coaches will not be held accountable. As far as training staff is concerned, that's not really a question I can answer here because I don't see what the training staff does with the team. I don't see the data that they get from, the devices that they wear and all that stuff. That's really a decision for the front office, for Dan Quinn even to make when the end of the season comes, is trying to identify, where did our program have shortcomings? Where can we make it better? Not that you're not always trying to make every program better, but if you find, deficiencies or shortcomings, like should we have known this deficiency? Should we have known, should this have not even been an issue? That's where maybe people can be replaced. So it's a hard question for me to answer. I'm not telling you no. I'm just telling you, like, coaches, unless they're violating some sort of CBA policy, most likely not. Trainers, it just, again, it depends on their day-to-day, and that's not something I can evaluate. It's not part of the job. I don't get to go into the training room and see what they do and things like that. Final topic of the episode, Insider Cam wants my thoughts on the quote-unquote messy video of Amon-Ra St. Brown punching Daron Payne first. Yeah. So I saw this video. I mean, look, once Javon Kinlaw told us in the locker room after the game that Amon-Ra St. Brown hit Daron Payne first, I didn't really doubt it. Like, I didn't, need the video. I did go to the 22 to see if I could see it, but the 22 cut off before it got to that point. Not because I needed to confirm what Javon Kinlaw said specifically, but just because, like, as a journalist, right, if I have the ability to confirm something, you need to go to those steps to confirm it. So that video coming out, all that stuff, like, it doesn't really surprise me. I mean, honestly, like, it's really up to the team whether or not they press it to the NFL, because, if Daron Payne is being suspended for an act of slapping Amon-Ra St. Brown, then you have video that Amon-Ra St. Brown smacked Daron Payne. Like, I mean, where's the difference here? Like, why is one player suspended, the other player is just, about to play a game on Sunday? Is it because the one player got a flag from a ref? So because the discretion of the referee who saw Amon-Ra St. Brown slap Daron Payne, because the referee's discretion led him to not throw a flag, that's why? Or is it something where on the field in the moment, the referee said, hey, that's enough. Don't do that again. We're not doing that. It's not going to happen. Both of you knock it off, da-da-da-da. And then Daron Payne came back slapping and was like, okay, well, I told you to knock it off. And this best sports analogy I can give you is like in Major League Baseball, where one pitcher hits a player, and everybody's like, oh, he did that on purpose. And then the ump gives both teams a warning. And then the manager of the team whose hitter got hit by the ball is like, hold up, dude. Like, my guy just got beamed on purpose. You agree because you're warning us. Yet before we can retaliate and have the unwritten rules of baseball take effect, you're giving me a warning. So now if I retaliate, I'm getting tossed and my pitcher is getting tossed, and you're taking that opportunity for us to retaliate away from us. So, in that sense, like, I get the angst about it or whatever, but I know for a fact that there are situations in the past, I'm not saying this one, but there have been situations in the past where an official will kind of see some pushing, some shoving, things like that, and be like, hey, look, knock it off. We're not doing this. Both of you knock it off. And the whole adage of like, well, he started it, doesn't really work. And then plus Daron Payne came back like 2 snaps later, right? Like, the heat of the moment excuse kind of goes away after a couple plays. And I know that, Amon-Ra St. Brown said something to him that, reignited that flame, but it just kind of doesn't work that way. So yeah, I mean, look, in a fully, justified world, Amon-Ra St. Brown would be suspended this week for the Lions as well, but it's not necessarily a full one. And it's up to the team whether or not they try to push the issue with the league office, which I don't think they're going to do, because then they have bigger fish to fry right now. So still a good question. Those are my thoughts on it. And that's going to do it for today's mailbag episode. Next time on Locked On Commanders, crossover Thursday, Kyle Krabs, Locked On Dolphins, and I break down everything coming up on Sunday morning here in Madrid, Spain. In the meantime, if you've got other questions or comments or topics for future mailbag episodes, you can send them to me directly by becoming a Locked On Commanders insider at joinsubtext.com/LockedOnCommanders. For your next listen, make sure you get your double dose of Locked On NFL. I don't know why I forgot the name of it. It's very simple. I was on it Wednesday afternoon with Tony Wiggins talking about a lot of good things. You get a full view of what the NFL landscape is. Find Locked On NFL on YouTube or wherever you're listening to this podcast. To the everydayers, I see you every day. I appreciate you every day. And I thank you again for coming through yet again today. We have got more Commanders practice here in Madrid, Spain in about 12 and a half, 13 hours. So I'm going to wrap this up. I'm going to go to bed, get some shut-eye, and get ready to get right back at it again tomorrow. So until that time, stay safe, be kind to one another. We'll talk again real soon right here on Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.